Hello and welcome to the latest Safer West Mercia podcast. My name is John Campion and I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. And I'm joined today by a Superintendent from West Mercia Police who I'll let introduce themselves.
Good morning, John. I'm Stuart Bill, Superintendent and LPA Commander for Shropshire.
So LPA Commander sounds an important reality, Stu. What does that mean in terms of your responsibility?
So in short, it means I'm responsible for the geographical area of Shropshire and everything that goes on therein. So all the local safer neighbourhood teams, the investigation functions and the patrol officers that are responding to all the 999 calls, they all come under me. I help manage them, coordinate them and make sure they're doing what we want them to do.
Sometimes in describing policing to the public, I sometimes describe as the most senior officer on the ground in the location, the person who has responsibility for that area. They get top cover from headquarters, which is a bit of a trek away from Shropshire, but they're the most senior person on the ground. I think outside of policing, they're always very understanding of the ranks. But I always say if the braid or the colours are fancier, then that must mean they're more important.
I guess that probably is me, but I would say I'm part of a team, part of a wider team, so it isn't just me, but clearly I'm the lead for Shropshire. But yeah, that's probably sums up what I do.
And you're fairly new to West Mercia in the grand scheme of policing career, because you've served for a couple of decades, but you're fairly new to us here in West Mercia.
That's right. So I started my career back in sort of 97, 98 as a special constable in West Midlands Police, joined there a couple of years later, spent my entire service with West Midlands Police until transferring over in May of this year to take post here in Shropshire.
And it must be fascinating for you as well, seeing that difference during COVID as we've come out of some of the restrictions, some potentially more coming, and also moving force area. Policing is never 2 days are never the same, and the different challenges that we in society also throw at you must make it even more interesting as how you keep us all safe.
No, absolutely. And it's amazing how much policing changes just by borders and boundaries. So moving from one force to the next, just different policies, procedures. But fundamentally, the job ultimately is the same. It's about protecting people, protecting our communities and doing everything we can. And clearly, COVID adds a different dimension to that. But as a statutory body, we've got a responsibility to support.
We touched on the complexities that make up keeping us safe. Now, those complexities often come from us as human beings, don't they? And all the differences that make us up. And some of those differences are very visible. You know, you can see them with the naked eye or hear them, but others aren't so visible and perhaps are harder for us to be aware of those differences. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is around hidden disability. And I'd just be interested in you explaining to the listeners as to what hidden disability really means.
Yeah, okay. So for me, obviously, you've already alluded to it, some things are incredibly visual. It's really obvious to everyone that some issues or problems or challenges an individual might have, but not all are. I personally have never classified myself as having a hidden disability, but I do have a story, and I guess that's what's brought me to the podcast today. And
tell us a bit about that story then. Tell us a bit about your upbringing, but also how then that led to where you are today in policing.
So I have a speech impediment. I've had it all my life. I've had speech therapy through most of my schooling years. When I first went to school at the age of sort of 5 at primary school, I could only make 5 different sounds. I wasn't able to talk at all. Only my family members could communicate for me. So my journey's been a challenge. I still struggle to speak. Even this conversation with you now, I have to focus on every single word I'm saying. If I don't, I will become really difficult to understand. And it's that constant challenge. People will probably pick up through my voice that I have maybe a lisp or there's something there, they won't really realise the internal battle that's going on through every moment of the words that I'm saying. And that's it's something I've had to deal with throughout schooling, policing, and still live with today, and just try and do my best to make sure I can articulate what I'm intending to say.
I've only known you since joining West Mercia, and it's not until you describe to me the issue that I then can hear small elements of it. But to the naked ear, is that a phrase? To my ear, I don't hear it. I hear your West Midlands accent, but I don't hear it. And often some of those things in us, that those challenges, those things that we struggle with, our conscious levels personally are obviously a lot higher, because I've heard you speak to rooms full of people, whether it be pro-policing or anti-policing, and it's only when you know it's there that I think helps that understanding, and then helps me understand you a bit more, because I understand why you might approach something more differently. You said before around not seeing it as a disability, and I get that actually. I'm dyslexic myself. I don't see that as a disability. I just see it as part of who I am. How do you think your speech impediment has either affected or changed the way you've approached policing, and the things that perhaps have shaped you as a senior police leader now?
So I think it's fair to say I'm an introvert by nature. It's hard to say, is it the speech impediment that's caused that, and has that caused me to step back, or is that who I am? I honestly, I couldn't say. But throughout my police career, certainly up until maybe 5 years ago, I never spoke about it, because this was the elephant in the room. It wasn't something I felt comfortable dealing with or comfortable talking about. But as I've moved through the ranks, I've kind of understood, actually, it's really incumbent upon me to talk about this sort of thing and show the people that I lead that it's absolutely okay to have maybe some weaknesses or some traits that maybe I wouldn't have chosen to have, but I've got, and they make me who I am. And then it's about turning them into strengths. So you're right. I certainly have had, and maybe still do to an extent, have a fear of talking in public spaces in front of lots of people. But that's not going to stop me. It hasn't stopped me. And as you've alluded to, I'll speak in community meetings. I am a firearms and a public order commander, so I will stand in front of sometimes hundreds of officers and brief them on deployments. It's something I'm always conscious of, my voice in the background, but I think it's probably I'm more conscious of it than anyone else. And that's why I think it's just really important to share just this little story about me, just so my officers and other officers in West Mercia and staff know that actually that's okay to have something that makes you a bit unique, and you shouldn't be afraid of it or to talk about it.
You also use in your work, and I know you did it in the previous role in West Midlands, but you brought it to West Mercia. You use social media and Twitter to talk about your work and what you do, for the public. Do you think some of your perception around how your impediment would be received, do you think that amplifies things like social media or not, or is it just another part of modern life?
I think if I'm understanding the question, is social media, are you asking whether I'd be concerned about the kind of this narrative on there?
Yeah. Do you think do you think the modern life is quite exposed, isn't it? And social media is quite an exposed, brutal place at times. Do you think that that the kindness that we've talked a lot about wanting to amplify during COVID, haven't we? The being kind thing, it's not always very present on places like Twitter. Do you think that stops us being more honest and being who we are, or do you just think it's irrelevant and we just ignore that as a bit of white noise?
No, I think social media can be. It can be used for lots of good, but it can be a very dark place, as we know. And actually, being police officer, visible police officer on social media, you attract a lot of criticism, and you develop a bit of a thick skin about things like well, just in policing in general. So if you're to throw in my voice and some of the challenges around that, I fully expect some people online will mock me, but that's okay, because I know far, far more will be supportive, whether actively or silently in the background. And that actually is no difference, in all honesty, to my police service. I know I've had colleagues mock me throughout my career, but I know far, far, far more are supportive and welcoming. And I think it's the greater good, isn't it, that this sort of thing brings. I'm not putting myself on a pedestal as the saviour of people with hidden disabilities. Far from it. But I just want to talk openly about mine in the hope that it might encourage others to do the same.
You talked a bit about your experience in your service. Looking a bit more forward, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, what do you think are the key bits you think we've got to make progress around ensuring what you've just described is less common, is less, we all talk about differences, don't we? Whether it be the football teams we like, or our heights, our hair colours, whatever it is, we do tend to pick on differences, and sometimes it is very unkind. But in terms of moving forward, the next 5-10 years, what do you think you'd like to see progress on, and look back, say, actually, that has changed, that has got better, that has improved?
Well, if you look at the diversity, equality, and inclusion strategy for the force, I think we've got to bring that to life. And actually recognise internally we've got far more diversity than we're probably acknowledging at the moment. And people come from so many different backgrounds. We've got single parents, we've got carers in our organisation, we've got people with hidden disabilities. We've got so much there that perhaps we don't fully embrace it ourselves. And I think to move forwards, we've got to do that and recognise that people bring different strengths to the table. So that comes in many, many ways, really. But for me, the crucial bit is that anyone can step forward and actually say, I have this, or this is me, or however they want to articulate it. But we encourage that. So actually, we truly understand the value of our workforce more than perhaps we do today. I think we've moved on a lot over my career, but the next 5 to 10 years, I think that will be massive.
If you were talking directly to somebody who might have a hidden disability, who was thinking about joining the police and thinking about what that career would mean, what would you say to them? What would you say as they weigh up that judgment? What would your advice to them be as a wise old police superintendent looking back and saying, if I had my time again, these are the things I would want as advice?
Okay. Well, first off, I think wise might be a bit of a stretch for me. But I would say go for it and be open and honest. Talk to people, seek counsel. There's lots of opportunities now for people trying to enter the organisation to talk to police officers on the ground and talk about any potential issues or challenges you might have, and get that advice and steer on where you can go with it. But absolutely, I wouldn't let anything hold you back, because you can achieve. And again, I'm not selling myself, but day one, at day one at school, I couldn't make a sound, and now I'll stand and brief hundreds of officers at public order events, and I still get those nerves. They'll never go away, but you learn to live with them and actually cope. And I think that's the important thing.
Somebody once said to me after I'd made a few remarks somewhere around, I wish I could speak like you can in front of large groups of people, and I turned and said in a moment of honesty, well, it absolutely terrifies me, and it terrifies me now doing it for the 100th time as it does doing the first time. And those things that drive us to do something are completely different to us all, aren't they? For example, I can't do it from notes. I can't read a speech. I've never been able to. I stumble over all the words. No matter how much I practice it, I'm much better with either bullet points or doing it from the cuff. But others would want to read it, and they would read it beautifully, wouldn't they? And those differences is what works for you, is what I hear, and what you are in terms of an individual. We should be proud of, and that for me is a really lovely sentiment, and actually really strikes with the communities across West Mercia, but also, I think, those that make up West Mercia Police.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that bit about being the authentic you is what's most important. Would I have chosen to have a speech impediment? No, I wouldn't. But actually, I am where I am today because of it and with it. And actually, it's important to recognise that it's part of who I am, as much as the fact that I'm 6'7", and the challenges that brings, and all that sort of stuff. And I just think that the more authentic we can be, the more humble as leaders and sharing this sort of stuff, it will create a more diverse workforce for West Mercia.
Because you, for me, have just touched on an interesting challenge, and you've said it a couple of times in this discussion around, it's not about me, or I'm not trying to be boastful, or those kind of things. Because I think there's a balance between being boastful and being pride. And I hear being proud of the things that make up you, and either the adversity that you've had to manage or manage to overcome. And I think that's a proud thing to say to those that might want to work in West Mercia Police. You can be who you are. You should be proud of if there's things there that aren't perfect, that's in your mind that you want to either improve or to change. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the other thing I've learned, and it's even more so in policing, when you're not authentic, it gets sniffed out, doesn't it? Often saying you're fooling nobody, they might not say it, but very rarely do these things pass the notice of those that you either work with or the communities that you interact with. If you were PCC for a day, Stu, we like to ask our people that join us on the podcast, if you were PCC for a day, what would you do? What would be the thing that you would use the office for?
What a question.
It can't be pay rises for superintendents, because that's not in my gift, unfortunately.
No, okay. So I think if I stick in kind of the theme of this episode around hidden disabilities, the DEI strategy for the force, and it's probably more than a day, isn't it? We've got what I would describe as a really good strategy around DEI. But words on paper and translating that into activity on the ground is where I think as a force we need to do more. We're doing lots, but we need to do more. And I think a drive around that inclusivity and making West Mercia a really inclusive place to work would be really important if I were the PCC, not least because when you do that, we know results flow. We know people perform better, which means we're delivering more for our communities, we're reducing crime, and everything comes from that. So that's probably where I am if I were PCC for the day, and maybe a little bit beyond.
And I as a commissioner, I do like the big things, and I think diversity, equality, and inclusion is something that you can never take your foot off the gas about. Getting that momentum's hard enough, and then keeping that momentum is the right one. And you're right. And featuring it in my work is a daily struggle in terms of making sure that it gets the appropriate focus. I often talk about the balance between the immediate and the important, because the immediate often backs out the way the important, doesn't it? And I need to make sure we keep the two in check, because you can't ignore the immediate often, but you also don't want to lose that focus on the important. Stu, really want to thank you for joining today and talking about a subject that really I think suits things like podcasts, bringing to life something that when written on a page doesn't always bring it to life, doesn't bring that humanity, that human interest element to it. And I want to thank you for talking about your own experience and what it means for you as a leader and as an individual, and somebody who has lived a journey through life with the things that make you up as a unique individual. And talking about it today, I think it's an important part of the journey that I was just talking about, the being proud of what we are and where we've come from and the things that make us different.
No, thank you, John. Thank you for the time. And clearly, we hope to keep pushing the DEI strategy for the force.
So I'd like to thank the listeners for today's West Mercia podcast. As you've heard referred to, there is some work around diversity, equality and inclusion, both for West Mercia Police, but also my work as Commissioner, from the central policy within my Safer West Mercia plan all the way through to my holding to account work. And those details can be found on the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner website. There is also the wider diversity, equality and inclusion strategy from West Mercia Police, which is on the West Mercia Police website. And those that are thinking of joining West Mercia Police, they're currently recruiting. If you go to their web pages, you will see all of the information if you're considering applying, and some of the support that's out there that with those that might have disabilities, whether they are visible or hidden, and the support that you can get from West Mercia Police in that process. I'd like to thank very much for those listening today, and please do ensure that you share the information that we've been talking about with others, those that might be interested and might be the thing that they need in terms of the advice and guidance, or understanding somebody else's lived experience with something that they thought might just be unique to them.